I stood at the altar beside my best friend Stephanie as she married my brother Jake, forcing a smile that felt like it might shatter my face. The lace of my lavender bridesmaid dress itched against my skin while I watched them exchange vows. Nobody in the packed church knew I was drowning in betrayal. 6 months ago, I caught them together after a year of secret dating. Now they were manipulating my grandmother to cut me from the inheritance meant for my therapy practice for underprivileged children. What they never expected was that Grandma Dorothy had uncovered their scheme and was waiting for the perfect moment at the reception to reveal a truth that would change everything. Growing up, Jake and I were inseparable despite our 3-year age gap. He was the protective older brother who taught me to ride a bike, helped with my math homework, and threatened any kid who dared to bully me. When our parents died in that horrible car accident when I was 16 and he was 19, our bond only strengthened. We became each other's support system, our own little family unit with Grandma Dorothy as our guardian angel. We only have each other now. Alicia Jake had told me the night after the funeral, his eyes red-rimmed but determined. I promise I'll always look out for you. For years, he kept that promise. He worked extra shifts to help put me through college while he finished his business degree. We had Sunday dinners together every week, even when we were both swamped with work or school. Jake was the constant in my life, my rock. Stephanie entered my life in 4th grade, when she defended me against a group of girls who made fun of my secondhand clothes. We became instant friends, sharing lunches, secrets, and eventually the painful journey through adolescence. Her home life wasn't great. Her parents fought constantly and barely noticed her, so she practically lived at our house. My parents treated her like a second daughter, and after they died, she was the shoulder I cried on countless nights. Soul sisters forever. We'd promised each other on graduation night pinkies linked like we were still 10 years old instead of 18. I never questioned her loyalty, not once in 15 years of friendship. After getting my bachelor's degree in psychology, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life. The therapy I received after my parents' death had saved me from a dark place, and I wanted to provide that same lifeline to kids who couldn't afford it. I worked through my master's program with this dream burning bright, a therapy practice focused on underprivileged children dealing with trauma and loss. "You'll change lives, sweetheart, Grandma," Dorothy told me when I shared my business plan with her. "Your parents would be so proud." I'd been saving diligently for years, picking up extra counseling hours whenever possible, but property in our city was expensive. The inheritance from Grandma Dorothy, money my grandfather had set aside for each grandchild to receive at 30 or upon Grandma's passing, would be the final piece that made my dream possible. Just one more year until I turned 30, and I could finally open those doors. While I was finishing my final semester of my master's program buried under research papers and internship hours, I noticed Jake and Stephanie spending more time together. They claimed they were helping each other. Jake was giving Stephanie advice on her struggling boutique business, and she was helping him renovate his condo. I felt a twinge of unease, seeing them laughing over inside jokes at family dinners, but I dismissed it as paranoia. These were the two people I trusted most in the world. I was wrong. 6 months ago, I came home early from a conference, exhausted but excited to share what I'd learned about new trauma therapy techniques for children. When I unlocked my apartment door, I heard Stephanie's distinctive laugh from my living room. I smiled, thinking she'd let herself in with her spare key to surprise me. But then I heard Jake's low murmur in response. I walked in to find them on my couch, his arms around her, their lips pressed together in a kiss that was clearly not their first. Photo albums of our childhood, the three of us together, lay scattered on the coffee table, a cruel backdrop to their betrayal. They sprang apart when they saw me, guilt flashing across both their faces before Stephanie burst into tears. "We were going to tell you," Jake said, standing up. "We just didn't know how." Tell me what my voice sounded strange, even to my own ears, hollow and distant. "We've been seeing each other," Stephanie whispered. "For about a year now." A year. 12 months of lies, secret meetings, and deception while I shared my life openly with both of them. The fight that followed was ugly. Words were hurled, like weapons, accusations of betrayal from me, defensive justifications from them. Why hadn't they told me? Why had they sneaked around behind my back? Did they think I wouldn't support them? Or did they simply not care enough about my feelings, to be honest? We didn't want to hurt you, Stephanie had pleaded. We were afraid you'd feel left out. Left out. As if they were planning a surprise party, rather than systematically excluding me from a significant part of their lives. I asked them to leave, needing space to process this revelation. But before they reached the door, Jake turned back with news that felt like a second slap. We're engaged, Alicia. And despite how you found out, we want you to be part of it. Stephanie wants you as her maid of honor. I stared at them in disbelief. They had hidden their relationship for a year, betrayed my trust, and now expected me to stand beside them at their wedding. It seemed delusional. Please, Stephanie begged, tears streaming down her face. You're my best friend. We want to make this right to keep things normal between us all. Normal. As if anything could ever be normal again. Against my better judgment and the advice of my therapist, I eventually agreed. Family was everything to me after losing my parents, and Jake was my only sibling. I told myself I could put aside my hurt feelings for their happiness. I convinced myself their relationship didn't have to change my bond with either of them. I was naive. Over the next months, as wedding plans accelerated, I noticed troubling changes. Jake and Stephanie began spending an unusual amount of time with Grandma Dorothy without inviting me. When I asked to join them for dinner or shopping trips, there was always an excuse. We're just going over wedding details, Jake would say. Boring stuff. We'll include you next time. But next time never seemed to come. When I called Grandma directly to plan our usual lunch date, she sounded distracted. Oh, I'm having Jake and Stephanie over that day to discuss some family matters. Perhaps next week. Family matters that didn't include me, her only granddaughter. The daughter of her beloved son. Something wasn't right. And as the wedding approached, the knot of unease in my stomach grew tighter. The months leading up to the wedding were an exercise in emotional endurance. Each bridal shop visit, each cake, tasting each floral arrangement decision felt like walking through quicksand while pretending I was strolling through a garden. I smiled in all the right places, offered the appropriate enthusiastic responses, and ignored the pitying glances from mutual friends who knew the history between us three. You're such a good sport about all this, said Tracy, another bridesmaid, who'd been friends with Stephanie since college. I don't know if I could be maid of honor at my best friend's wedding to my brother, especially after you know. She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. After what I asked, suddenly alert. Tracy looked startled. After them dating behind your back for so long? That's what I meant. But her averted eyes told me there was more she wasn't saying. Planning Stephanie's bachelorette party was particularly surreal. I booked a wine tour at local vineyards, arranged a private chef for dinner, and even designed custom Team Bride t-shirts featuring inside jokes from our 15-year friendship, all while feeling like an outsider looking in on what used to be my life. During this time, Grandma Dorothy's behavior became increasingly concerning. Our weekly Sunday brunches, a tradition since my parents died, were repeatedly canceled. When we did manage to meet, she seemed uncomfortable changing the subject whenever I mentioned my therapy practice plans or my upcoming 30th birthday. How are the wedding preparations going? She would ask instead, steering us back to safer territory. At 78, Grandma Dorothy was sharp as a tack, with the energy of someone 20 years younger. She'd raised my father as a single mother after my grandfather died young, built a successful real estate business from scratch, and maintained an active social life with her bridge club and volunteer work. This sudden reticence wasn't like her at all. 3 weeks before the wedding, I was helping Jake move some boxes to his new house, the house he and Stephanie would share after the honeymoon, when I overheard a phone conversation that made my blood run cold. Yes, we need to get those papers ready before the ceremony. Jake was saying, his voice low. I don't want any loose ends. No, she doesn't suspect anything. We'll tell her after, once everything's settled. Grandma's on board completely. When he saw me standing in the doorway, he quickly ended the call. Who was that? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Just the wedding planner, he replied smoothly. Last-minute details. But wedding planners don't prepare papers, and they don't concern themselves with what I might suspect. At the rehearsal dinner held at an elegant restaurant downtown, my unease deepened. Jake stood to give a toast, champagne flute raised toward our grandmother. I want to especially thank Grandma Dorothy for her generosity and trust. he said, his eyes lingering meaningfully on her. Family legacy is everything, and we promise to honor your faith in us. Grandma nodded, a tight smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. Several relatives exchanged glances, as if they were privy to something I wasn't. I tried repeatedly to get Grandma alone that evening, but Jake or Stephanie always materialized at my elbow just as I approached her. Eventually, Grandma claimed fatigue and left early, patting my hand with an enigmatic, "Everything will work out as it should, dear." The next day, I borrowed Stephanie's phone to find the number for the florist when a notification appeared, a text from Grandma Dorothy that simply read, "I've thought about our conversation. You're right that Alicia doesn't need to know yet. We'll discuss after the wedding." Before I could read more, Stephanie snatched the phone back, looking flustered. "Found what you needed?" she asked too brightly. Later, scrolling through previous messages, I noticed large gaps in her text history, with Grandma chunks of conversation clearly deleted. My stomach churned with anxiety. What didn't I need to know? What were they hiding from me? The night before the wedding, I returned to my apartment after the bridesmaids' dinner to find an unmarked envelope that had been slipped under my door. Inside were printed copies of email exchanges between Jake and Stephanie dated over the past 4 months. "Dorothy is coming around to our perspective," Jake had written in one. "She agrees Alicia is too emotionally unstable to handle that kind of money responsibly." I mentioned how she impulsively quit that counseling center job, Stephanie replied, "and how she's always changing her business plan." Dorothy seemed concerned. Another email outlined their strategy. "Keep emphasizing how we want to start a family right away. Dorothy loves the idea of great-grandchildren. Contrast that with Alicia's single status and career focus. Old school values work in our favor here." The most recent email contained their victory lap. "Papers are drawn up. Once we're married, everything changes. She'll have no legal recourse." I sat on my kitchen floor until sunrise, the printouts scattered around me, trying to process this level of calculated betrayal. The two people I trusted most in the world had been systematically undermining me to my grandmother, painting me as unstable and irresponsible, all to redirect my inheritance to themselves. My inheritance, the means to fulfill my dream of helping traumatized children, was being stolen by the very people who had once supported that dream. But who had sent these emails? Who else knew what Jake and Stephanie were doing? And was it already too late to stop them? On the morning of the wedding, I moved through the preparations like a sleepwalker. The hairstylist curled my hair into soft waves while I stared blankly at my reflection. The makeup artist commented on my pallor, adding extra blush to put some life into my face. Inside the bridal suite of the Grand Lake Hotel, champagne flowed, and music played as 5 bridesmaids took selfies and helped Stephanie into her custom gown. "You look amazing," I told her mechanically, when she emerged in a cascade of white silk and lace. And she did radiant in her betrayal. "Thank you for being here," she whispered as she hugged me. "It means everything that we're all still family." Family. The word felt hollow now. I contemplated confronting her with the emails right there in the bridal suite, surrounded by pastel chiffon and half-empty mimosa glasses. But what would that accomplish? If their plan had already succeeded, if Grandma had already signed new estate documents creating a scene, would only cast me as the emotionally unstable person they'd described to her. Instead, I needed more information. I needed to understand exactly what they'd done before deciding how to fight back. During the ceremony in the hotel's garden pavilion, I scanned the rows of guests until I found Grandma Dorothy in the front row. Rather than looking emotional or joyful as one might expect at her grandson's wedding, she sat rigid and alert, her eyes sharp, as they followed the proceedings. When Jake and Stephanie exchanged vows promising to honor and cherish each other, I caught a flash of what looked like disgust cross my grandmother's face. Interesting. At the reception, I watched Jake and Stephanie work the room. They spent an inordinate amount of time at Grandma's table, Stephanie touching her arm affectionately, Jake refilling her water glass with solicitous care. But when they moved to greet other guests, Grandma's pleasant expression dropped, replaced by one of cool calculation. I made my way to Martha Bennett, Grandma's best friend since college, and her bridge partner for 40 years. If anyone knew what was happening with Grandma's estate, it would be Martha. "Such a lovely wedding," I said, settling next to her with 2 flutes of champagne. Yes, lovely, Martha agreed, accepting the drink with a distracted smile. After some small talk about the flowers and cake, I steered the conversation toward family matters. Grandma seems preoccupied lately. I've barely seen her these past few months. Martha's fingers tightened around her glass. Well, she's had a lot on her mind with Jake getting married and all the estate changes. Estate changes? I asked innocently. Martha looked uncomfortable. Oh dear, I thought you knew, Jake said. Well, he told several of us that you'd been having some financial difficulties, that you'd asked for advances on your inheritance multiple times. I nearly choked on my champagne. He said what? Something about gambling problems, Martha continued hesitantly. He said you'd agreed it was better if he managed the family assets as the more financially responsible one. Gambling problems? I'd never even bought a lottery ticket. Martha, none of that is true, I said firmly. I haven't asked for any advances. I don't gamble. And I certainly haven't agreed to Jake managing my inheritance. Confusion crossed her face. But he was so specific. He mentioned you'd lost nearly $20,000 at a casino in Atlantic City last year. That's why Dorothy revised her will. So that was their game. Character assassination followed by financial theft. I excused myself, heart pounding. I needed evidence of exactly what they'd done. While guests were occupied with dinner, I slipped away to the hotel suite where Jake had gotten ready earlier. The door was unlocked. The hotel staff were still clearing out his things. On the desk lay a leather portfolio embossed with the name of an expensive law firm. Inside, I found what I was looking for: legal documents, naming Jake as executor of Grandma Dorothy's estate with Stephanie, listed as secondary executor. My name appeared nowhere in the document, except in one devastating clause. Previous provisions for Alicia Marie Wilson are hereby revoked. The date on the document was just 3 weeks ago. The signatures, Grandma's, Jake's, and 2 witnesses were all in place. It was done. They'd succeeded. I was still standing there, papers in hand, when the door opened and Jake walked in. What are you doing here? He asked sharply, then saw what I was holding. Those are private legal documents. Private documents about my inheritance, I countered, my voice shaking with rage. You lied about me. You told people I have gambling problems. For a moment, Jake looked cornered. Then his expression shifted to one of condescending pity. Alicia, we've been worried about you for months. Your impulsivity, the way you keep changing your business plans, the risky investments you wanted to make. Grandma agreed you're not in a position to handle that kind of money responsibly. What risky investments? What are you talking about? I've had the same business plan for years, a therapy practice for underprivileged kids. You know this. He shrugged, dropping the pretense. Look, Stephanie and I have plans. We want to start a family right away, buy investment properties. We need capital. You're single-focused on your career. You don't need the money as much as we do. The callousness of it stole my breath. So, you just decided to take what was promised to me? Money that would help children heal from trauma. Business is business, he said coldly. Family money should stay with family. And soon Stephanie will be family. You'll get over it. I stared at my brother, this stranger, wearing his face, and felt a surge of determination. I'm going to tell Grandma everything. These emails, your lies about gambling. Jake laughed and the sound chilled me. Go ahead. Grandma signed the new documents weeks ago. It's done, Alicia. We've already won. I fled the sweet legal papers clutched in my hand, vision blurred by unshed tears. The reception continued below, music and laughter floating up from the ballroom, where 150 guests celebrated the union of 2 people. I now realized I never really knew it all. I found myself in the hotel's formal garden, a quiet space of manicured hedges and stone benches. Sinking onto one, I tried to steady my breathing and think clearly. Everything I'd worked for, my dream of helping children heal from trauma the way I had been helped now, seemed impossibly out of reach. There you are. I looked up to find Grandma Dorothy standing before me, elegant in her navy blue dress, and pearls her silver hair perfectly coiffed as always. Despite her 78 years, she stood tall and straight, her gaze direct. I've been looking everywhere for you, she said, settling beside me on the bench. Her perfume, the same Chanel No. 5, she'd worn my entire life, brought a fresh wave of emotion. "I know what you did," I said, holding up the legal papers. "I know you cut me out of the inheritance." Instead of looking guilty or defensive, Grandma tilted her head curiously. "Tell me, Alicia, what would you have done with your inheritance?" The question caught me off guard. The same thing I've been planning for years: open my therapy practice for underprivileged children dealing with trauma and loss. You know this, Grandma. We've talked about it dozens of times. And where were you thinking of opening this practice? I found a building on Maple Street. It used to be a dental office, so the basic infrastructure is there. I'd need to renovate, but the location is perfect, close to 3 schools with high need on 2 bus lines for accessibility. Grandma nodded thoughtfully. How many children did you project being able to help annually? Based on my business plan, around 150 to start scaling up to about 300 within 5 years. I'd bring in 2 other therapists once established, focusing on different specialties: grief counseling, trauma, recovery, family therapy. As I spoke, memories surfaced of the dark days after my parents' death. The therapist who'd helped me navigate that crushing grief had become my inspiration. Dr. Langley had charged my parents' insurance the standard rate, but had taken pro bono cases too. She believed every child deserved quality mental health care, regardless of their family's financial situation. Her compassion had literally saved my life during those bleak months. That's why my practice is so important to me. I finished, my voice cracking. I know what it's like to need help as a child, and be fortunate enough to receive it. But so many kids don't have that access. Grandma was silent for a long moment. Then she reached into her clutch purse and removed a small digital recorder. "I hope you don't mind, but I've recorded our conversation," she said calmly. "I wanted to confirm what you've consistently told me over the years." "I don't understand," I said, bewildered. Grandma's expression softened. "I've been distant these past months for a reason, dear. I've been conducting my own investigation." She explained that she'd first become suspicious when Jake and Stephanie suddenly began showing intense interest in her financial affairs after announcing their engagement. In 40 years of business, Grandma had developed a keen sense for when someone wanted something from her. "They started with subtle questions about my will, about family legacy," she said. "Then came suggestions that you might not be ready for significant financial responsibility. When they claimed I had gambling debts and had asked them for advances on my inheritance, things I had never done, Grandma's suspicions solidified. "I may be old, Alicia, but I'm not senile," she said with a flash of the sharp wit I'd always admired. "I knew you weren't gambling in Atlantic City. You were at a psychology conference in Philadelphia that weekend, and you called me from there." Rather than confronting them immediately, Grandma had employed the business acumen that built her real estate empire. She gathered information. She hired a private investigator, a former client, whose child she'd helped buy their first home, despite credit challenges. Thomas documented everything. She continued. He recorded Jake and Stephanie discussing their plans to manipulate both of us. He found their emails, the same ones someone anonymously sent to you, I imagine. My mind reeled. "You knew all along. But you signed the documents. I saw your signature." A sly smile crossed her face. "I signed falsified documents. Yes. Documents that Thomas and my actual attorney prepared, which appear legitimate, but have no legal standing whatsoever. I wanted to see how far they would go." The deception turned my stomach. Jake had raised me after our parents' death, protected me from bullies in school, helped me move into my first apartment. Now he had become the very thing he once defended me against. "I never thought Jake would do something like this," Grandma said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "When your father died, I poured everything into raising that boy. I taught him your grandfather's values: integrity, honesty, family loyalty." Her eyes misted briefly before she blinked the emotion away. "But Jake has made his choices, and now I've made mine." She reached again into her purse and withdrew another set of documents, these bearing the letterhead of Preston Martinez and Wu, her longtime attorneys. "These are the real legal documents prepared last week and already filed with the court. I've established a trust specifically for your therapy practice. Jake and Stephanie cannot access it under any circumstances." Additionally, I've restructured the remainder of the estate with specific conditions attached to Jake's portion. I stared at the papers, unable to fully comprehend what I was seeing. You protected me, I whispered. Grandma's hand covered mine, her skin papery, but her grip still strong. Of course I did. You're my granddaughter, and more importantly, you've never given me reason to doubt your character, unlike your brother. She stood smoothing her dress with practiced hands. Now I believe it's time for my toast at the reception. I wasn't originally on the program, but I've asked the wedding planner to add me. A mixture of dread and vindication swirled in my stomach. What are you going to do? Grandma Dorothy's eyes flashed with the determination that had helped her succeed as a businesswoman in an era when female executives were rare. I'm going to give your brother and his new wife a wedding gift they'll never forget. When we returned to the reception, Jake and Stephanie were in the center of the dance floor, surrounded by friends cheering as they performed some choreographed moves to a Bruno Mars song. They looked carefree, triumphant even. Jake caught sight of me with Grandma and faltered momentarily, before plastering on a smile and waving. Grandma Dorothy squeezed my hand before approaching the wedding planner, who nodded and headed to the DJ booth. A moment later, the music faded, and the MC announced it was time for toasts. The best man went first, Jake's college roommate, who told stories about their frat days that made half the guests cringe. Then Stephanie's father gave a tearful speech about his little girl, conveniently omitting how little attention he'd paid to that little girl throughout her childhood. I was supposed to speak next as maid of honor, but before the MC could call my name Grandma, Dorothy was already moving toward the microphone with surprising speed for a woman approaching 80. I believe I'm next, she said, firmly taking the mic. The MC, clearly confused, checked his list before Grandma waved him off. Family privilege, she added with a wink that charmed the crowd. For those who don't know me, I'm Dorothy Wilson, grandmother of the groom and honorary grandmother to the bride, who spent nearly as much time at my dinner table as my actual grandchildren over the years. Polite laughter rippled through the room. Jake and Stephanie exchanged nervous glances but maintained their smiles. When my husband George was alive, Grandma continued, he had a favorite toast he'd give at family gatherings. He'd say, "To those who tell the truth, may their paths be straight. To those who lie, may they be caught before sunset." The room grew quieter. Jake's smile became rigid. George built our family business on 3 principles: honesty, integrity, and loyalty. He believed that how you conduct yourself in business reflects how you conduct yourself in life, and vice versa. Her eyes fixed on Jake. These values were passed to our son Richard, who with his wife Mary raised 2 wonderful children before their tragic accident 12 years ago. At the mention of my parents, I felt the familiar pang of loss. Around the room, guests who knew our family history nodded solemnly. After we lost Richard and Mary, Grandma continued, I helped raise Jake and Alicia, trying to instill those same values my husband held dear. Her voice took on an edge as she added, "So, imagine my surprise when I discovered that my own grandson and his new bride have been systematically lying to me for months." A collective gasp went through the room. Stephanie paled visibly while Jake took a step forward. "Grandma, I think you've had too much champagne," he said with a forced chuckle. "Maybe we should." "I haven't touched a drop," she interrupted crisply, "and I have all my faculties intact, as my doctor, attorney, and private investigator will all attest." The word investigator hit Jake like a physical blow. His eyes darted to me accusingly. "Yes, a private investigator," Grandma confirmed, noticing the reaction. "When people suddenly start telling me that my granddaughter, who has been working toward opening a therapy practice for underprivileged children for years, has gambling debts and poor financial judgment, I tend to ask questions." Murmurs swept through the crowd. Several guests turned to look at me with revised expressions from pity to confusion. For months, Grandma continued, Jake and Stephanie have been telling family members and friends that Alicia is financially irresponsible, mentally unstable, and unfit to manage her inheritance. They've claimed she has gambling problems and has requested multiple advances on funds she hasn't yet received. Her voice remained steady, factual. This wasn't an emotional outburst, but a calculated exposure of truth. None of this is true. These statements were manufactured with one purpose: to convince me to remove Alicia from my will and redirect her inheritance to them. Jake stepped forward again, this time anger replacing shock. That's not what happened. We were concerned about Alicia's. I have recordings, Grandma interrupted, holding up the small device she'd shown me in the garden. Of you and Stephanie discussing how to manipulate me, how to isolate Alicia, and how to secure her inheritance for yourselves. The room had gone completely silent. Even the servers had paused in their movements, trays of champagne suspended mid-distribution. But rather than play those recordings here and further embarrass you both on what should be a joyous occasion, I'll simply share my wedding gift. She reached into her clutch and pulled out the legal documents she'd shown me earlier. This is a trust document establishing the Wilson Family Children's Therapy Foundation with Alicia as the sole director. It's funded with the inheritance that was always intended for her, plus an additional amount I've decided to add after witnessing her graceful handling of this situation. Stephanie's mother gasped audibly. Jake's face had gone from red to ashen. As for you, Jake, Grandma continued, your portion of the inheritance now comes with conditions. It will be held in trust until you demonstrate the values your grandfather and parents would have expected. This may take years, or it may never happen. That's entirely up to you. She folded the papers and tucked them back into her purse. One final note. The documents you believe I signed 3 weeks ago, Jake transferring executorship to you and removing Alicia from the will completely. Those were fabricated by my investigator and have no legal standing whatsoever. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Jake looked stricken while Stephanie began to visibly shake. Grandma turned to the stunned guests. I apologize for this unpleasantness during a celebration. Please enjoy the remainder of the evening. The bar will remain open, and I believe there's still cake to be served. She handed the microphone back to the speechless MC and turned to walk away. Before she could leave the floor, however, Stephanie suddenly lurched forward, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she blurted, her voice breaking. This wasn't my idea. I never wanted to hurt Alicia. Jake grabbed her arm. Stephanie, don't. She wrenched away from him. No, I'm done lying. To the shocked audience, she continued. Jake convinced me Alicia didn't really need the money. He said she'd probably abandon her therapy practice idea anyway, that it was just a phase. He said we deserved it more because we were starting a family. She turned to me, mascara running down her cheeks. He said you'd never know that we'd give you a small portion later as a gift. But then he kept pushing for more, wanting me to tell Dorothy you'd been acting erratically, that you weren't sleeping, that you mentioned gambling problems to me in confidence. Each revelation felt like another betrayal. I had trusted these people with everything, my hopes, my insecurities, my dreams. They had weaponized it all against me. That wasn't the worst part, Stephanie continued, seemingly unable to stop now that the floodgates had opened. After the wedding, he planned to suggest you needed residential mental health treatment. He found a place that would admit you for evaluation based on family referral. He said once you were admitted, it would be easy to establish a pattern of instability. Horrified gasps filled the room. Jake lunged toward Stephanie, his face contorted with rage, but was intercepted by the best man and one of Stephanie's uncles, who grabbed his arms. You've lost your mind, Jake shouted at Stephanie. Everything we worked for. Everything you worked for, she corrected, backing away from him. I wanted us to be happy to start fresh with Alicia's blessing. You're the one who turned this into some kind of heist. As the confrontation escalated, Stephanie's parents rushed forward. Her father looked bewildered, but her mother turned to me with genuine remorse. Alicia, I had no idea, she said. Jake told us you had approved of all this, that you wanted him to manage the family money because you were focused on your career. Other guests began to approach, offering support or simply watching the drama unfold. The picture-perfect wedding had dissolved into chaos, revealing the ugly truth beneath the white tulle and flower arrangements. Through it all, I remained frozen, trying to process what I'd just heard. My brother hadn't just wanted my inheritance. He'd planned to have me committed to a mental health facility to ensure I couldn't fight back. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. The edges of my vision began to blur, and my heart hammered painfully in my chest. I recognized the symptoms of a panic attack beginning, something I hadn't experienced since the months after my parents' death. Without a word to anyone, I turned and fled the ballroom, gasping for breath, searching for quiet and space to think. Behind me, I heard Grandma Dorothy's voice clear and commanding, "I believe this reception is concluded." I spent the night in my apartment with my phone turned off, curtains drawn, replaying the events of the day like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. By morning, I had 17 voice messages, 32 texts, and 9 emails from family members, wedding guests, and friends, expressing everything from shock to sympathy. Nothing from Jake or Stephanie. The revelation of their betrayal had been public and absolute. According to my cousin Megan, who called, despite my silence, the reception had ended abruptly after my departure. Stephanie's parents had taken her to their hotel room, while Jake had stormed out alone, ignoring questions from stunned guests. The $1,000 cake remained uncut, the carefully planned first dance never performed. It was like something from a movie, Megan said. No one could believe it. Everyone's talking about how brave Grandma was, and how horrible Jake and Stephanie have been to you. In the days that followed, I learned more about the extent of Jake's deception. Family friends called to apologize for believing his lies. Aunt Carol from Cincinnati admitted she'd been told I was in financial trouble due to poor lifestyle choices and had even contributed money to a fund Jake claimed was to help Alicia get back on her feet. Uncle Paul revealed that Jake had shown him fabricated bank statements, indicating I had withdrawn large sums for gambling. "He seemed so concerned about you," Paul said. "He had me completely fooled." The betrayal cut deeper with each new revelation. These weren't just spontaneous lies. This was a calculated campaign to destroy my reputation and steal my future. I sank into a dark place I hadn't visited since the aftermath of my parents' death. I called in sick to the community counseling center where I worked part-time, unable to face people or offer therapeutic support when I felt so broken myself. I stopped answering calls or texts, even from well-meaning friends. I subsisted on delivery food and barely slept. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was exhibiting exactly the kind of instability Jake had falsely attributed to me. The difference was, my crisis was real and directly caused by his actions. On the 4th day after the wedding, Grandma Dorothy let herself into my apartment with her emergency key. She took one look at me, unwashed hair, dark circles under my eyes, surrounded by takeout containers, and went into action mode. "Get in the shower," she ordered. "I'm making you a proper meal, and then we're going to talk." 30 minutes later, clean and dressed in fresh clothes, I sat across from her at my small kitchen table as she served homemade chicken soup and fresh bread she'd brought with her. "You can't let them win by falling apart," she said bluntly. That's exactly what Jake would use to validate his lies. I know I admitted the soup warming me from inside, but I keep thinking about all those years, how he was there for me after Mom and Dad died, how he helped me through college. Was it all an act? Did he ever really care about me? Grandma considered this. I think Jake did care in his way. But somewhere along the line, caring got twisted up with resentment. He was 19 when your parents died, suddenly responsible for a teenage sister while dealing with his own grief. That creates a complicated dynamic. That doesn't excuse what he did. No, it doesn't, she agreed firmly. Nothing excuses attempting to institutionalize your sister to get her inheritance. I'm just saying people are complicated, and even terrible actions usually have understandable, if not justifiable, origins. This was why I loved my grandmother. Even in the face of profound betrayal, she maintained her psychological insight and balance. "The trust documents are finalized," she continued, changing the subject. "The attorney will contact you next week about accessing funds for your therapy center. I've included enough to cover the building on Maple Street, plus all renovations and startup costs." Tears sprang to my eyes. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if—" "Don't thank me for something that was always meant to be yours," she interrupted. "Your grandfather set aside that money for his grandchildren's futures. He would be proud of how you're using it." We spent the afternoon reviewing my business plan, making calls to commercial real estate agents, and researching renovation contractors. Grandma's practical approach pulled me out of my emotional spiral and refocused me on the future. By evening, I had appointments to view the Maple Street property and 2 alternative locations. Over the next few days, I gradually re-engaged with life. I returned to work, started therapy sessions to process the betrayal, and threw myself into preparations for my practice. The outpouring of support from friends and extended family bolstered me each message or call reaffirming that I wasn't alone. A week after the wedding, I was reviewing renovation estimates in my apartment when there was a knock at the door. Through the peephole, I was shocked to see Jake unshaven, wearing wrinkled clothes, looking nothing like his usual polished self. I hesitated, heart racing, before opening the door with the security chain still attached. "What do you want?" I asked flatly. "5 minutes," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Please, Alicia. I just want to explain." Against my better judgment, I let him in, keeping my phone in my pocket with Grandma on speed dial. Jake paced my living room, hands shoved in his pockets. "I know I can never make this right," he began. What we did, was unforgivable." "Then why are you here?" He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I wanted you to understand. After Mom and Dad died, I gave up everything to take care of you. My scholarship to Cornell, my plans for grad school. I stayed local, worked 2 jobs, made sure you had everything you needed." "I never asked you to do that," I said, anger flaring, "and I've been grateful every day." I know, he said quickly. "But watching you succeed, get your master's, pursue your dreams. Part of me felt like I deserved something in return for the sacrifices I made. So you decided to steal from me, to destroy my reputation, to have me committed." He winced at the last accusation. "That was never really going to happen. It was just leverage, a contingency plan." "A contingency plan?" I repeated incredulously. "Do you even hear yourself?" Jake sank onto my couch head in his hands. "Stephanie's left me. Her parents have convinced her to annul the marriage. The trust Grandma set up for me is basically worthless. Unless I complete years of community service and therapy, my life is ruined." I felt no satisfaction from his misery, only a profound sadness for what our family had become. "I need your help, Alicia," he said, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. "If you could talk to Grandma, tell her you forgive me." "I don't forgive you," I interrupted, "and I won't help you manipulate Grandma again." His expression changed, hardened. "I see. After everything I did for you growing up, you won't lift a finger to help me now." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. "I thought you might say that. That's why I recorded our conversation. I'm sure people would be interested to hear how cold and unforgiving you are to your only brother, how you refuse to help family in need." The realization hit me like ice water. This entire visit was another manipulation. He hadn't changed at all. "Get out," I said, moving to the door. "And go ahead, share that recording. All it proves is that I won't be your victim anymore." As I opened the door, Jake's face contorted with rage. "You always were Dad's favorite," he spat. "Perfect, Alicia. The smart one, the compassionate one. He had big dreams for you. For me, just expectations to be responsible to take care of everyone else." In that moment, I saw clearly what had corrupted my brother, not greed, but a lifetime of perceived inequity he'd never addressed honestly. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said quietly. "But your feelings don't justify what you did." After Jake left, I sat in stunned silence, processing this final betrayal. Then I called my therapist and scheduled an emergency session. I wouldn't let Jake's toxicity pull me back into darkness. I had a therapy center to build, children to help, and a life to reclaim. 6 months passed, like water through cupped hands, sometimes rushing, sometimes trickling, but always moving forward. Fall turned to winter, winter to spring, and with the changing seasons came transformation. The Wilson Family Children's Therapy Center opened its doors on a bright April morning. The building on Maple Street, once a tired dental office with outdated equipment and water-stained ceiling tiles, had been transformed into a warm, welcoming space designed specifically for traumatized children. Soft colors, comfortable furniture, arranged in cozy groupings, play therapy rooms, equipped with sand trays and art supplies, and private counseling offices, with soundproofing for older clients. Everything I had envisioned for years now stood, realized before me. Grandma Dorothy cut the ribbon at our opening ceremony, pride shining in her eyes as she introduced me to the small crowd of supporters, colleagues, and community members. My granddaughter Alacia has turned personal pain into purpose, she said. This center will be a place of healing for generations of children to come. The journey to this moment had not been easy or straight. After Jake's final attempt at manipulation, I'd had to confront painful truths about my family and myself. Through intensive therapy, I examined the dynamics that had allowed Jake's resentment to fester undetected for years. I questioned my own role. Had I been oblivious to his feelings? Had I taken his sacrifices for granted? My therapist, Dr. Marshall, helped me understand that while I could acknowledge these questions, I was not responsible for Jake's choices. Healthy adults communicate their needs and feelings, she reminded me. They don't concoct elaborate schemes to punish others for perceived slights. I had no contact with Jake for 3 months after our confrontation. Then unexpectedly I received an email. Alicia, I've been in therapy twice weekly since February. My therapist thinks it's important I make amends as part of my recovery. I don't expect forgiveness, but I would like to apologize in person. No recordings, no agenda. Just truth. Jake. I showed the email to Dr. Marshall, who cautioned me to protect my boundaries while remaining open to genuine change. People can transform, she said, but only if they're doing the work for themselves, not to gain something from others. After careful consideration, I agreed to meet Jake at a coffee shop near my new therapy center in public, with no expectation beyond hearing him out. When I arrived, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the polished business appearance and confident swagger. He looked thinner, more subdued, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater. "Thank you for coming," he said, hands wrapped around his coffee mug like he needed its warmth. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. For the next hour, Jake spoke without excuses or justifications. He talked about the resentment he'd carried since our parents' death, not just toward me but toward them for leaving him with adult responsibilities at 19. He acknowledged the toxic jealousy that grew as I pursued higher education while he worked in a job he didn't love to help support us both. He described how Stephanie's interest in him had fed his ego, making him feel chosen over me for once. "None of this justifies what I did," he said, echoing my own words from our last encounter. "I betrayed you in the worst possible way. I violated your trust. I tried to steal your dream. There's no excuse." I sat silently processing his words, searching for insincerity but finding none. "My therapist helped me see that I've been defining myself as your caretaker for so long that I never developed my own identity," he continued. "When you no longer needed me, I didn't know who I was supposed to be. I always needed my brother," I said quietly. "Just not as a caretaker. As family, as support, as someone who believed in me." Jake's eyes filled with tears. "I lost sight of that. I lost sight of so much. I didn't offer forgiveness that day. Trust once shattered doesn't mend in a single conversation. But I did offer something else. If you're serious about changing, about making amends, then prove it through actions over time." In the months that followed, Jake did exactly that. He continued therapy, joined a grief support group to finally process our parents' death properly, and began volunteer work with at-risk teens, fulfilling part of Grandma's requirements for his trust, but also discovering a genuine passion for mentoring. Meanwhile, I focused on building my practice. We opened with 3 pro bono cases for every paying client, gradually expanding our services as word spread. By our 6-month anniversary, we had a waiting list and had brought on a second therapist specializing in art therapy for trauma. As for Stephanie, our paths crossed only once at a grocery store 3 months after the wedding. She approached hesitantly, eyes downcast. "I filed for annulment," she said, without preamble. "It's final now." I replied, unsure what else to say. "I'm moving to Colorado next week," she continued. "Fresh start. I just wanted you to know how sorry I am. I should have been stronger, should have refused to participate in Jake's plan from the beginning." I studied her face, this woman who had been my best friend for 15 years before betraying me so completely. There was genuine remorse there, but also a fundamental weakness of character I'd never noticed before. Or perhaps it had always been there, and I'd chosen not to see it. "I hope you find what you're looking for in Colorado," I said finally. "Not forgiveness exactly, but release. I was letting go of the anger that bound us together, allowing us both to move forward separately. On the evening of our center's 6-month anniversary, Grandma Dorothy hosted a small celebration at her home. Around her dining table sat the people who had supported me through the darkest period of my life. Dr. Marshall, my therapist. Megan, the cousin who checked on me daily after the wedding disaster. Martha, Grandma's friend who had apologized profusely for unwittingly participating in Jake's deception. And Thomas, the private investigator, who had uncovered the truth and become an unexpected friend. And somewhat surprisingly, Jake. His attendance had been a last-minute decision on my part. He'd been making consistent efforts to rebuild trust, small things like remembering important dates, checking in without asking for anything, sending articles relevant to child therapy that he thought might interest me. When Grandma suggested including him, I found myself nodding instead of refusing. To the Wilson Family Children's Therapy Center, Grandma toasted, raising her glass, and to Alicia, who turned betrayal into blessing. As conversations flowed around the table, I observed the new shape of my family, no longer defined by blood alone, but by trust, respect, and mutual support. Jake participated quietly, no longer the center of attention he once demanded, to be listening more than speaking. Later, as guests began to leave, he approached me on the porch. "I'm proud of what you've built," he said simply. "Not just the center, but the life you've created despite everything, despite me." "I couldn't have done it without Grandma," I admitted. "She saved me in more ways than one." "She saved me too," Jake said, "by not making it easy, by setting conditions that forced me to face myself." He hesitated. "I know our relationship will never be what it was, but I hope someday you might trust me again, even a little." For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt a small opening in my heart. Not forgiveness yet, but possibility. "Trust is earned over time," I told him. "Keep doing the work, and we'll see." In the year since Jake and Stephanie's disastrous wedding, I had lost my brother as I knew him and my best friend. But I had gained something more valuable: clarity about who I was and what mattered most to me. I had built a therapy practice that was already changing children's lives. I had discovered new depths in my relationship with my grandmother, whose wisdom and strength continued to inspire me. Most importantly, I had learned that family isn't defined by unconditional acceptance of harmful behavior. True family, whether by blood or by choice, is built on mutual respect, honesty, and genuine support of each other's dreams. As I drove home that night, I thought about the children who would come through our center's doors in the years ahead. Children dealing with loss, betrayal, and pain, similar to what I had experienced. I would tell them what I now knew to be true: that healing doesn't mean forgetting that boundaries aren't selfish, that trust should be earned, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to stand firmly in your truth. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you deeply trusted? How did you rebuild your life afterward? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that recovery from betrayal is possible. Thank you for listening, and I hope whatever challenges you're facing, you find the strength to transform them into something beautiful.